As anyone that knows anything predicted, moving further to the right was a terrible idea for CNN because the CEO, the new CEO who's only been there for a year, has now been fired. So I'm going to go over the details here and just how stupid it was for CNN to think that they could win over Trump voters. But first, if you want to go back and watch my coverage of the hiring of Chris Licht back a year ago, in my piece here titled CNN Announces Big Changes, I discuss how, they were talking openly about how they're going to end progressive commentary. As if they ever had progressive commentary. Like, the idea that CNN was ever on the left when they have both sides to every freaking issue, be it, climate change, be it taxes on the wealthy, healthcare for all. When there is objective reality and CNN is unwilling to recognize that and instead replaces objective reality with neutrality, they end up pretending that there is both sides to every issue. And that has always been CNN's issue. And the past year has only been, it's been the same thing, but now further placating the right wing in doing that, in trying to appease people that would vote for Trump, in doing things like a Trump town hall that just recently happened. So not much has really changed on air, apart from just a little more coddling of the right. And it turns out, terrible idea, because they lost people. And why would you win over right-wing viewership? Why? Are you stupid? Right-wing viewers want to see their ideas reinforced. They want to live in a happy fairy tale land. They're going to stick with Fox News, or actually many are now leaving Fox News for further right-wing outlets like Newsmax, because Fox News is sometimes being a little critical of Trump because they want DeSantis. So it's just the idea that any right-wing viewer or any Trump viewer would come to CNN is just so stupid. But that's where we get to today. Chris Licht, the new head of CNN, again, new as in for a year, now out at CNN. They say, they're saying, he's out. He was fired after a conversation. He was fired. I don't know why there's all this dancing around this firing, but he was fired. And one of the main dominoes to fall before this happened was this piece in The Atlantic, a 15,000 word breakdown of the terrible job Chris Licht has done over the past year. So this reporter, Tim Alberta, spoke with almost 100 reporters at CNN, the vast majority of which did not like Chris Licht. And ultimately, I think this is what led to his firing. I don't even think it has to do with the ratings. I don't think it has to do with what was happening on air. I think it really has to do with losing the people that work there. Because for years, Jeff Zucker ran CNN as incredibly right-wing. He was fine because he had his office on the 17th floor with the other reporters. Chris Licht came in, moved his office to the 22nd floor with his own view of the Hudson River, had his own receptionist, and that made people that worked there feel like they were disconnected from the person leading the company. That was maybe the worst thing that Chris Licht did, because that led to him getting fired. Like, that's ultimately people that worked there didn't feel like he was one of them. That's why this happened. That's why this piece was written the way it was. That's what led to him now being fired. Because again, what was happening on air at CNN wasn't really all that different than what was happening in the past under Zucker. But there was also this piece that came out on Monday, which I think was the last domino to fall, from Oliver Darcy, who is the CNN media critic. So this is a CNN newsletter, and I'll get to a quote from him in a second here, but he also goes on to be critical, and not be critical himself, but he's just reporting on what people feel there. And I think ultimately when that is in a CNN newsletter, it's hard to ignore the reality that people do not want, or I should say the employees at CNN did not want Chris Licht there. So this goes to the news of him being fired. Quote, I met with Chris and he will be leaving CNN. David Zaslav, the chief executive of parent company Warner Brothers Discovery, told CNN employees at the start of the network's daily editorial call Wednesday. Licht's departure, which came days after a devastating 15,000-word profile in The Atlantic, capped a tumultuous year for CNN, marked by layoffs, historically low ratings, and rock-bottom employee morale. I will say a lot of this stuff is not really on Licht. The layoffs, there was when Licht first came in, they got rid of CNN Plus, which CNN had put like all this money into their online. I guess it was an app, CNN Plus, and it just bombed immediately. And then it was Chris Licht's job to just follow through with what David Zaslav had decided in terms of getting rid of CNN Plus. So that isn't necessarily on Chris Licht. But of course, all of this touches anyone at the top of these companies, because ultimately it is their direction, whether it's Zaslav, whether it's Chris Licht. Even if Chris Licht is just carrying out what Zaslav wants him to do, he's still carrying out those orders as opposed to putting in his own perspective. But in terms of viewership, their primetime ratings tanked 61%, and that was a report from back in March. And more specifically here, this is more recent, CNN's total primetime viewership sank to 494,000 viewers, a 25% year-over-year decrease. I've had YouTube videos that have gotten more views than this. Now, I know it's not the same thing. It's not live viewers. But that's pretty terrible, especially considering it is a 25% decrease. And MSNBC, their main competitor, on the other hand, averaged 1.16 million for a 14% gain compared to last year. And MSNBC, to their credit, in rare cases, have great people like Mehdi Hasan. And the fact that they've actually kept Mehdi Hasan on has only helped them. So when you have people like him who are actually willing to speak to issues like the far right-wing Israeli government and their abuses against Palestinians, whether it's workers' rights, whether it's unions, low wages, healthcare, even if it's just one person on the network, because, MSNBC is still a massive corporation. They still don't want that to be the main message being put out there. But if they give enough carrots or hold enough, I don't know, carrot's probably the wrong terminology here. If they have, one cupcake handed out to the audience, it's enough to keep people watching that network compared to watching CNN, where, again, they're just capitulating to a further right-wing audience. But Tim Alberta, he's the writer of the Atlantic piece, wrote here, in setting up that piece, I spent stretches of the past year shadowing Chris Licht, the new boss at CNN, who harbored ambitions of rehabilitating the journalism industry. This is an account based on interviews with nearly 100 of his own reporters of what went wrong. Now, the backstory to this is that Chris Licht signed on to agree to do this investigative piece of him over the course of this year, or this past year, because he thought it was going to be a success, right? Like Chris Licht just came in, he's like, all right, great. I'm going to have this reporter shadow me for a year. It's going to be great. I'm going to have this amazing piece of how I saved CNN in just a year. And it didn't, obviously didn't go that way. So that also speaks to Chris Licht's ego, which was a main feature in that piece. There was one part of the report where the reporter shadowing him at a gym. So Chris Licht is working out and he's lifting some weight and he's like, oh, I'd like to see Jeff Zucker do this. Like, why would you do that in front of the reporter that is going to be doing this expose on you? It's so embarrassing. And look, it's one thing if Chris was joking, like, oh, whatever, a tongue-in-cheek joke about how he's lifting weights and Jeff Zucker, I guess, didn't lift weights. But that was one example of many, countless examples of how Chris Licht was very egotistical, in his own mind, self-obsessed, and really was not engaged with the people around him. Which, again, ultimately, I think that is the main reason why he was fired here, is because he was not a good boss behind the walls of CNN, not necessarily because of what was being put out. So, New York Magazine here, this is from Brian Stelter, who used to work at CNN as the media critic, writing, he ultimately portrayed Licht, speaking of the Atlantic piece, as paranoid, self-absorbed, and reluctant to admit mistakes, Trumpian, is the phrase several staffers used with me. And to be clear, these were all people who respected Licht at the outset. Quote, I was really rooting for him, one said. Another insider remarked, I'm so struck by how consumed he is by the coverage he gets and the respect his predecessor had. So again, speaking to Licht's obsession with what others were saying about him. Now, this is one example of how Chris Licht's tenure there resulted in some on-air disasters. So this again from the piece, live television is a volatile thing. People and sets and scripts are always being changed for all kinds of reasons. Still, CNN employees had reason to be suspicious. They wondered if some sort of deal had been cut with Trump's team, promising the placement of approved panelists in exchange for his participation in the town hall. At the least, even absent from some official agreement, it seemed obvious that CNN leaders had been contorting the coverage to keep Trump happy, perhaps to prevent him from walking off stage. At one point during the pregame show, when the word sexual abuse appeared on the CNN chyron, one of Licht's lieutenants phoned the control room. His instructions stunned everyone who overheard them. The chyron needed to come down immediately. So CNN was reporting facts about what had just come out in court about Donald Trump and that abuse case. And they were told to take it down because they were afraid of offending Trump before the town hall. This is clear journalistic malpractice. It's something that if you worked at CNN in that newsroom at the time, I would hope that you would feel the need to come out and at least leak this. I mean, I guess they were leaking it to this guy, but this is to change coverage like this to help a political candidate. Like, you can't get any worse. This is no different than what Fox News does. So it shows you that this attempt to try and appease the right not only hurt their coverage, not only hurt their ratings, it also hurt their ability to do actual journalism. A couple last things here. Many CNN staffers feel the news operation isn't broken and thus doesn't need Zaslav or Licht to fix it. Zaslav, who seems not to agree, has channeled his views through Licht, sometimes loudly enough that others could overhear him doing so over the phone. But now Zaslav is telling associates that David Levy, who was brought in just, I think, on Monday as the COO to kind of babysit Licht in these 3 days, I guess, is bringing adult supervision. So the reason I want to share this is because it really shows you it's not just Chris Licht. This is also on David Zaslav, who I've recently also been talking about because of the whole writer strike. And Zaslav, of course, runs Warner Brothers Discovery. So you have here a vision that isn't just Chris Licht's vision of moving to the right, it's also Zaslav's vision. It's both of their visions. Whoever replaces Licht is, at most, it's going to go back to how CNN was 2 years ago, where I guess there isn't a Trump town hall. But pretty much everything else stays the same. Because again, even though, yes, you could point to moments, and I think I even covered a few of them, where CNN was clearly moving to the right in some areas, in some commentary, it wasn't all that different than what CNN had done traditionally, of playing this game of being neutral when there is objective reality. So it's important to understand, journalists should be recognizing objective reality. What is the facts? And who is going to benefit from what is happening? And it's my opinion that news generally should speak to most people, which is the working class. But even if you're not going to do that in your coverage, at least do it in your commentary and discuss who benefits where. But the way CNN approaches every issue is from the point of neutrality. The right says this, the left says this, who knows what the truth is? And in reality, it's not even that neutrality. It's more like the far right says this, the right says this. Who knows who's right? Because they don't actually represent a true left-wing view. A true left-wing view would be a socialist view or a communist view, which I know may sound scary to you, but you have fascists running amok on Fox News. You have actual authoritarians pushing garbage out on a daily basis on massive platforms. I think it's perfectly fine to discuss, hey, what is a true working class message? Maybe have one person, at least one person out there that is an actual socialist or, a Marxist, someone like Richard Wolff, who is pushing that different a message out there, an anti-capitalist message, but they don't have that. So from an economic point of view, all coverage on CNN is right-wing because they don't have an actual left-wing representation. Last thing. This is from the CNN piece that came out on Monday. And again, I think this is what ultimately led to Licht being fired. In the wake of the Atlantic's explosive story, I've spoken with dozens of staffers across the company. There are a wide range of emotions coursing through the halls of CNN. Some staffers are frustrated. Others are angry. Many are sad about the awful state of affairs that has taken hold of an organization they love. There is one near universal sentiment, however, that has been communicated to me. Licht has lost the room. I think this is why he was fired. It's not about what's happening on air, not about drama around, CNN's morning show or whatever. No, he lost the room. People that worked there did not want to work for him. That's it. Will anything change now? No. Things will change behind the scenes at CNN. People that work there, I'm sure, will be happier with someone else in there. But the actual product on air, I would be stunned if there is any push towards a more human rights oriented, more progressive or left wing message put out there on CNN. I just don't. CNN's a massive corporation. They're going to continue being a massive corporation. That's not going to change.